Hello everyone and welcome to my channel Y&R Trends. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Jill Abbott had delivered cutting lines, legendary business speeches, emotional breakdowns, and scathing truths throughout her decades in Genoa City, but nothing prepared the room, the audience, or even her own family for the 7 shocking words she unleashed that would change the lives of Sally Spectra and Billy Abbott forever. Words that dropped like a dagger straight into the heart of the Chancellor Winters and Abbott legacies. "You are cut out of my future forever." Those 7 words, spoken with ice-cold precision and devastating clarity, did not merely sting. They detonated, ripping through family ties, corporate alliances, romantic relationships, and emotional foundations that had taken years to build and could take lifetimes to repair. The moment came not in a boardroom, not in front of cameras, but in a private confrontation that spiraled into a storm of betrayal, disappointment, and righteous fury, with Jill rising to a height of intensity and heartbreak that only she could reach, having watched her company, her family name, and her own faith in people being dismantled piece by decisions made in the shadows by 2 people she never imagined would be the ones to betray her in this way. Billy, her son, the boy she defended through scandals and breakdowns, whom she protected even when the world rolled its eyes and whispered he'd never live up to his potential, stood there with his jaw clenched, his chest tight, and his soul cracking under the weight of his mother's rage. Sally, equally stunned but trying desperately to hold on to composure, realized too late that whatever she had believed she could manage or finesse was now spiraling beyond her control, because when Jill Abbott made a decision, it was final. The betrayal Jill felt ran deep, tangled in years of exhaustion from cleaning up Billy's messes, only for him to fall into yet another crisis that wasn't just personal but corporate, risking the foundation of Chancellor Winters at a time when the entire company was under scrutiny from investors, the media, and the brutal business world waiting for a stumble. But this betrayal wasn't just about business, it cut through Jill on a personal level, because while she had tolerated the missteps of her son in the past, this time his actions had been influenced by someone she saw as a threat. Sally Spectra, a woman Jill had watched rise faster than many in the fashion, media, and corporate space, but also a woman who, in Jill's eyes, too often put ambition, romance, and survival instincts ahead of loyalty, protection of family legacy, or business stability. Sally and Billy's relationship had started as something Jill could roll her eyes at but ultimately ignore, because she believed Billy's romantic entanglements were his to manage and his to suffer through if they inevitably crashed. However, what Jill didn't expect was for Sally to become entwined in the corporate coup Billy had pushed forward, a takeover move that clashed with Jill's authority and undermined her decisions as founder. Billy, full of confidence and convinced he was protecting the company from stagnation, had moved forward believing he was acting for the greater good, unaware, or unwilling to acknowledge, that his plan came across as an attack on Jill's leadership, and when Sally, sharp-tongued, focused, and always ready to defend her own territory, supported him in front of the other executives, Jill felt something inside her break. It wasn't just this one meeting. It was years of Billy not learning, years of Jill pulling him up from the brink, only to see him repeat self-destructive patterns that not only damaged him but threatened everything she had built from nothing. Jill remembered coming into the business world as a woman no one respected, clawing her way upward against men who didn't think she belonged, against a society that told her she was disposable, and against even her own limitations, all while believing that someday her son would inherit not just her company but her legacy of resolve. Instead, Jill was watching him gamble with that legacy as though it were a poker chip on a casino table, and Sally was the dealer handing him the cards and fanning the flames. When the board meeting ended in chaos, Jill stormed into Billy's office, demanding to know if he had truly turned against her, and when he defended his decision, explaining with passion and conviction that the company needed new direction, fresh blood, bold thought, Jill didn't hear innovation. She heard a son who no longer saw value in the work she had bled for. The argument grew louder, voices echoing through the halls, and Sally walked in at the worst possible moment, attempting to mediate but instead pushing Jill over the edge when she dared to tell Jill that perhaps she was standing in the way of progress. That sentence alone made Jill's eyes turn to ice. How dare Sally, the newcomer, the outsider, the woman who had built a resume off of jumps from company to company, talk to Jill Abbott about legacy, direction, or vision? And in that moment Jill snapped. The 7 words came out clear, sharp, irreversible. "You are cut out of my future forever." And she meant it. Billy's face drained of color because Jill wasn't just lashing out in anger. She was delivering a verdict. Jill Abbott did not speak lightly. She meant exactly what she said. In the seconds after those words landed, silence fell so thick it cut the air. Sally blinked, speech stuttering to life as she tried to clarify, but there was no room left for clarification, because Jill had already made her next move. She informed Billy that she was taking back full control of Chancellor Winters effective immediately, that she would override his decisions with board power, and that if he wanted to follow Sally's path, he could do so outside the company. Sally gasped, realizing what Jill had just done. Not only pushing Billy out of his position, but lumping Sally into the same fate, because Jill was not separating the two. As far as Jill was concerned, Sally and Billy were one problem, one betrayal, one direction poisoning the company from within. In Sally's mind, panic unfurled because losing her place at Chancellor Winters meant losing the momentum she had finally built after years of stumbling through Genoa City's professional battlefield. Sally had fought tooth and nail to build credibility, especially after her complicated relationships and past failures, and now one blow from Jill could tear all of it down. Billy, meanwhile, felt his mother's words like a sword through the chest. He had disappointed her before. Yes, but this time he believed he was right. Chancellor Winters had stagnated under fear-based leadership, and someone needed to challenge the status quo. But the problem was never Billy's intentions. It was his inability to separate ambition from impulsiveness, strategy from ego, and war from personal wounds. Jill, though furious, was also heartbroken. She didn't want to exile her son. She wanted to shake him awake. But Jill's history had taught her one thing. If she didn't draw the line now, she would lose the entire company to boardroom warfare, rival manipulation, and leadership collapse. And as the confrontation deepened, Jill's pain began to spill out. Not in tears but in brutal truth. She laid out years of cleaning up Billy's wake. From public scandals to failed ventures to power plays that left her put out fires instead of building legacy. Sally spoke up at that moment, telling Jill that Billy had grown, that he was trying to lead, that he believed in a new direction because he cared about the company's future, and for a second Jill softened just slightly, until Sally added that Jill needed to learn when to step aside. That sentence was the final spark thrown into a gasoline lake. Sally did not understand the woman she was speaking to. Jill Abbott was not Catherine Chancellor. She was not Ashley Abbott. She did not inherit her power. She earned every inch of it. And Sally saying she needed to step aside was not just disrespect. It was a rewriting of Jill's life story. Jill stepped forward, eyes steady, voice calm in a way that chilled the room, and she informed Sally that she had no intention of stepping aside, but Sally might find herself stepping outside the building permanently before the night was over. Billy begged his mother to reconsider, telling her she was reacting emotionally, that this wasn't the battle she thought it was, that he and Sally were trying to save the company from corporate stagnation and external threats. But Jill fired back that she had been fighting those threats before Billy had learned to tie his shoes. And while Billy stood there drowning in the weight of the confrontation, Sally made her next mistake. She said Jill was afraid of losing control. Jill laughed. Not a hysterical laugh, but the kind that comes from a woman who has been underestimated for decades, who has had enemies tell her who she should be, what she should fear, and when she should fall. And that was the moment Jill realized that Sally Spectra did not just support Billy's risky move. She believed she was the intellectual power behind it. Jill, exhausted and wounded, looked at Sally in a way that stripped away affection, tolerance, and diplomacy, and she said the 7 words that would haunt both Sally and Billy in the weeks to come. Words that would not just cut them out professionally but emotionally. You are cut out of my future forever. The reverberation of those words didn't end when Jill stormed out. They followed the two lovers like ghosts. Sally stood in the office after Jill left, trying to remain strong, but inside her chest something shattered. Her entire life in Genoa City had been built on trying to escape the mistakes of her past, trying to stand on her own accomplishments rather than falling into the trap of destructive choices. But Jill's brutal dismissal made Sally fear that she was living her old life in a new setting, always one step away from losing everything. Billy, on the other hand, experienced a different kind of collapse, the emotional collapse of a son who had just watched his mother, the one who never gave up on him, say she was finally finished. He didn't know whether he wanted to chase after Jill or hold Sally, or walk out and scream into the hallway, or punch a wall or burst into tears. All of those impulses collided at once, leaving him silent, standing in the middle of the office like a man who had just been stripped of his title, purpose, and belonging. Sally stepped toward him, trying to soothe him, but Billy pulled away. Not because he blamed her, but because the weight of the moment was too enormous for him to carry in anyone else's presence. He walked out of the office without a word, leaving Sally alone as the building lights flickered in the reflection of the windows, making Sally feel like the city itself was judging her. And across town, Jill was already making her next moves, calling the board chair, revisiting contracts, setting emergency meetings, rewriting power structures, and making sure that if Billy and Sally wanted to start a war, she would make sure she fired the first and final strategic shot. Jill wasn't heartless. She was heartbroken. And heartbreak in Jill Abbott didn't lead to tears. It led to strategy. It led to consequences. It led to an emotional and professional earthquake that would ripple for months, tearing alliances apart and forcing Billy and Sally into corners where they would have to redefine themselves or crumble under the weight of Jill's decision. And Sally realized something chilling. Jill's words weren't a threat. They were prophecy. The aftermath of Jill's declaration was immediate, palpable, and suffocating, settling like a dense fog over Billy and Sally as they walked separately through the corridors of Chancellor Winters, each step echoing with the weight of Jill's words and the realization that their fates had been irrevocably altered. Sally, normally composed and calculated, felt an unfamiliar tightness in her chest, a kind of existential vertigo, as though the ground beneath her had shifted and she was suddenly standing in a space where her ambitions, her careful plans, and even her loyalty to Billy were all called into question. Because Jill Abbott was a force that could dismantle carefully constructed worlds with the precision of a surgeon, and the fear that she had become expendable in Jill's eyes was a horrifying revelation that threatened not only her career but her sense of identity in a city that demanded survival at any cost. Billy, meanwhile, was experiencing a different but equally devastating emotional cascade. For years he had sought his mother's approval, trying to carve out a space in her shadow where he could be both independent and worthy of recognition. But tonight Jill had made it abundantly clear that he was not just falling short. He had overstepped, jeopardized the company, and aligned himself with the wrong ally, effectively severing the invisible umbilical cord of trust and support he had relied on since childhood, leaving him adrift in the merciless waters of adult responsibility, without the life preserver of maternal protection. As the minutes stretched into hours, both of them struggled to comprehend the breadth of Jill's move. Not merely a reprimand, not simply a professional rebuke, but a total and public excision from her future, a declaration that everything they had fought for, loved, or built in alignment with Jill's vision could no longer exist under her guidance, leaving them to navigate the fallout on their own, unarmed and vulnerable in a landscape that Jill had meticulously shaped for decades, and which she was now wielding as both shield and weapon. The shockwave of Jill's pronouncement did not stop with Billy and Sally. Word traveled quickly throughout the company, reaching the ears of long-standing executives, junior staff, and even external investors who had long admired Jill Abbott for her strategic genius and her unyielding command of the boardroom. Whispers circulated in hushed tones around meeting rooms and coffee machines, the name Jill Abbott, carrying the weight of both fear and awe, as employees tried to parse what the mother of Billy Abbott had truly meant by her 7 devastating words. Some speculated that the pronouncement indicated a looming corporate shakeup, a restructuring designed to eliminate perceived weak links or opportunistic partners, while others, more cynical, assumed it was the emotional fallout of years of personal grievances finally erupting into a visible, uncontainable force, a force powerful enough to upend careers, reputations, and even personal relationships in one calculated sweep. Sally found herself receiving calls from her closest allies, each inquiry laced with curiosity, concern, and barely veiled judgment, as colleagues debated whether she had truly misjudged Jill, overstepped her welcome, or failed to appreciate the gravity of aligning herself with Billy in his increasingly precarious maneuvers. Meanwhile, Billy faced a barrage of questions from the board, some sympathetic, many judgmental, all weighing on him with the combined force of professional scrutiny and maternal disappointment, a dual burden he had never anticipated in his career, leaving him teetering between guilt, defensiveness, and an aching sense of betrayal, because Jill's words were not mere threats. They were the manifestation of a lifetime of accumulated tension between mother and son, a tension that had been quietly building with each misstep, each rebellion, each challenge to her authority, culminating in a moment so absolute in its power that no apology, rationalization, or plea could undo the damage already done. As the evening progressed, Jill herself retreated to her private office, closing the door against the storm she had unleashed, but the quiet she sought was deceptive. The silence was charged with the electricity of impending chaos, as if the very walls of Chancellor Winters held their breath in anticipation of the moves her declaration would trigger. She sat behind her mahogany desk, the weight of decades of corporate victories and personal sacrifices pressing down on her shoulders, reflecting on the delicate balance she had always maintained between nurturing talent and enforcing authority, between forgiveness and discipline, between maternal instinct and the ruthless demands of running one of Genoa City's most influential companies. Jill's mind replayed every conversation, every misstep, every moment of perceived disrespect from Billy and Sally, cataloging them meticulously, understanding in that moment that her words, though devastating, were not born from impulse. They were the culmination of years of strategic observation, emotional calculation, and an unflinching assessment of who had earned her trust and who had not. She recognized with crystal clarity that leadership demanded difficult decisions, often at the cost of personal relationships, and that the act of cutting Billy and Sally out of her future, while painful, was necessary to preserve the integrity, stability, and vision of the company she had spent a lifetime building, because in Jill Abbott's world, power was not negotiable, loyalty was earned, and any compromise of vision could imperil everything she had fought to achieve. Meanwhile, across the city, the repercussions of Jill's declaration rippled through the lives of both Billy and Sally in unexpected ways. Sally, ever resilient, began to confront the magnitude of her predicament, grappling with a sense of isolation she had rarely experienced, as she realized that her professional identity, her carefully cultivated networks, and her relationship with Billy were now all in jeopardy simultaneously, forcing her to confront uncomfortable truths about dependency, ambition, and the precariousness of trusting in the goodwill of those who wield power without hesitation. She spent hours walking through the streets of Genoa City, replaying every interaction she had with Jill over the past months, questioning whether subtle comments she had made, decisions she had supported, or alliances she had formed might have contributed to Jill's explosive response, wondering if there was any way to mend the fracture without sacrificing her own principles, all while feeling the creeping weight of anxiety that threatened to overshadow her usually sharp, strategic mind. For Billy, the emotional terrain was equally treacherous. He oscillated between anger, despair, and self-recrimination, replaying each decision that had led to Jill's public declaration, analyzing whether his own arrogance, impatience, or failure to anticipate his mother's reaction had doomed him to this moment of professional and personal exile, and considering the potential consequences for his career, his reputation, and his relationship with Sally, which suddenly seemed fragile and uncertain, poised on the edge of collapse. The psychological impact of Jill's words was compounded by the social dynamics of Genoa City itself, where news traveled fast, gossip was relentless, and alliances shifted as quickly as loyalties could be tested, leaving both Billy and Sally to navigate an intricate web of intrigue, resentment, and judgment in which every misstep could compound the consequences of Jill's decisive pronouncement, turning a single moment of confrontation into a sustained period of tension, strategizing, and survival that would define the trajectory of both their personal and professional lives for months to come. At the office, the fallout manifested in tangible, operational disruptions. Projects that Billy had championed suddenly stalled as employees hesitated to act without the blessing of Jill Abbott, who now wielded unchallenged authority, making unilateral decisions to remove personnel aligned with Billy and Sally from critical initiatives, reallocating resources, and reshaping strategic priorities to reflect her own vision and judgment. The atmosphere of tension was palpable, with staff members whispering in hallways, meeting rooms filled with nervous energy, and external partners anxiously awaiting clarification on the company's direction. Every email sent by Jill carried the unmistakable weight of authority, her language precise, commanding, and designed to communicate both the necessity of compliance and the inevitability of consequences for disobedience. For Billy and Sally, each decision felt like an indictment, a reminder that Jill Abbott had not merely rejected them personally, she had recalibrated the company to operate without their influence, rendering their prior efforts moot and forcing them to confront the stark reality that their roles in the enterprise had been fundamentally altered, perhaps permanently. The professional isolation mirrored the emotional one, as colleagues who had previously offered support now hesitated, uncertain of how to navigate the shifting power dynamics, leading to a heightened sense of vulnerability, insecurity, and urgency for both Billy and Sally, whose once confident approach to leadership and collaboration now seemed fraught with peril, every move potentially scrutinized, every strategy potentially undermined by the inescapable shadow of Jill Abbott's authority.